The South African Youth Economic Council has joined a long list of organizations rejecting new BEE rules. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced last week that SOEs are no longer needing to reject non-compliant service providers. Let's discuss this further. We're joined by the organization's national spokesperson, Sthandiwe Msomi. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Sthandiwe. And of course, like I said in my intro, you all join a long list of people who say this declaration by the ministry really sets economic transformation gains back years, and this is just going to plunge people who are working themselves to be part of the economy. Basically, they'll be unable to.
Of course. Thank you so much for having us, Rafio, on your show today. Indeed, it's quite affirming to see so many other Black lobby groups as well that have joined the call for these amendments, the Triple PFA, to be revoked and to be reviewed. Because BEE has been so critical to advancing the economy and to ensure that the transformation that we want to see is one that actually results in material gains to Black businesses and Black communities. And so to see these rules and pieces of legislation being revoked and to see SOEs not need to comply with them is disheartening, particularly because as well SOEs are in sectors that are critical to transformation and economic growth of this economy. We talk about Eskom, Denal, Transnet, all of these SOEs that are in critical strategic sectors of this economy. And we want to see more Black businesses in the energy sector. We want to see more Black businesses in railway and manufacturing. And so if these critical SOEs aren't mandated by the hands of legislation to procure services from Black people, it sets a bad precedent, and one wonders if these sectors that are clearly today still untransformed will ever
It would appear that we've lost Sthandiwe Msomi speaking about the critical issue that we've been ventilating throughout the week of triple BEE policy changes that were made or announced by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, saying that state-owned entities no longer have to rely on the BEE certificate of a particular business before doing business with them. And there are two arguments here. One is the transformation of the economy in the country, wherein more people of color are engaging in the economy and doing business with state-owned entities. But the other one, which was highlighted by the Constitutional Court in this matter in particular, is issues of justice and fairness and skills being put paramount as opposed to the color of a person or the color of the business per se. As Sthandiwe, I understand that you have rejoined. If you can hear me, one of the other arguments that I wanted to put forward to you is that, and this was highlighted by the Constitutional Court, justice, fairness, the skills being taken into consideration, those being paramount to the idea of acknowledging a business or engaging a business just because of the color of its cohort. What do you all, as the South African Youth Economic Council, say to this?
Yeah, indeed, it's quite critical that we don't only rely on BEE, but we ensure that Black businesses grow to such a point where they actually have the skills and the capacity itself to render services to these SOEs that are critical to our economy. But to also say that because Black businesses don't have the skills or capacity, we need to do away with these transformative pieces of legislation is quite pathetic in that it abdicates or it allows government to abscond its duty in investing in Black people and Black communities. Because while we're having this conversation, no one is having a conversation about how the national budget itself and fiscal policy does not promote investment into Black communities, into higher education, into investing in small businesses so that those businesses themselves can achieve economies of scale and grow and be able to compete with JSE listed companies or white-owned companies that have the capacity itself to render services. So I think that the conversation of fairness and justice and equality in looking for businesses to procure services from mustn't just be viewed from the lens of race being used as a metric, but it must also be viewed from the lens of the fairness in Black businesses not being invested invested in, while the JSE and big business continues to be the ones to be viewed as having the capacity only to render services to the state. And I think once we look at the fiscal policy of the country and whether or not it promotes pro-poor, pro-working class, and pro-SMEs, then we aren't actually having a fair conversation.
And I suppose that's the catch-22 here, Sthandiwe, is that perhaps the issue with SOEs in this regard is that they're not finding good enough black-run businesses to provide the different services and goods that they would need. And it speaks partly to the point that you've made there around the resources and the support of young black budding businesses in the country. But there's also another issue here, Sthandiwe, is red tape, regulatory frameworks, as well as the inaccessibility to funds for businesses to enter the economy. And so naturally they are unable to provide those necessary services and goods to the SOEs, hence policies like this being amended. How does government immediately deal with that issue? It talks about regulation and cutting red tape all the time, but we don't see these things happen.
I think that government needs to change its tone about red tape, because the only red tape that they are talking about is red tape that prevents big business from being able to do their businesses way more efficiently. And it's quite disastrous for us to make red tape synonymous with transformation, because those two should never be viewed in the same breath. Yes, we must tackle red tape for small to medium enterprises. We must tackle red tape in the Department of Small Business and Business Development, in DFIs such as CEDA and the IDC, because those entities are critical to funding the development of small businesses. And so I think that if government channels their efforts in minimizing red tape for small to medium enterprise businesses, then we're having a progressive conversation. But to hear, executives in the boards of ESCOM talk about transformation being a red tape and them trying to do business is quite concerning, because it also makes you question the social compact. The president has been talking about how we need a social compact and an agreement between the private sector and the public sector to tackle poverty, inequality, and unemployment in this country. But if we're going to then leave the agenda of transformation to state institutions, as the amendments to the triple PFMA are doing, then it is quite concerning, because that red tape in itself also leads us to question if it's just more efficient to procure businesses from white-owned businesses as opposed to black-owned businesses. And remember, entities don't have the imperative of needing to transform society and redistribute wealth in this country. Government has a huge role to play in doing so. And so if government itself is going to make red tape and transformation synonymous to one another, then it makes us question if the government of the day itself even has an agenda to transform this economy.
Very interesting insights there, Sthandiwe Msomi. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. That is the South African Youth Economic Council's National Spokesperson, Sthandiwe Msomi.